All right, buckle up, everybody, because today's deep dive is a nostalgia nuke. Delta Force.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that Delta Force
Up from the dead.
is back from the dead. But hold on to your joysticks, because this isn't just a simple remaster, it's a full-on reinvention. We're talking a whole new game, and we've got intel from articles, reviews, even whispers from the developers themselves
Who insider info?
to break down exactly what's changing and what's staying gloriously old school.
You know what's got me fascinated here is how Delta Force is attempting this high wire act, balancing its hardcore legacy with like the realities of the modern gaming scene.
Yeah, and they're not being shy about shaking things up. Free-to-play multiplayer across PCs, consoles, even your phone. It's like they're airdropping this game onto every digital device known to man.
And that's not just about like casting a wide net, though. It's a calculated strategy.
Yeah.
See, since the original Delta Force, the gaming world has gone through like some seismic shifts. Mobile gaming in particular has exploded. And by going free to play on those platforms, Delta Force is tapping into a massive and potentially lucrative new audience.
Makes you wonder why more games haven't gone that route.
And speaking of going big, I was blown away when I saw they're using Unreal Engine 5 for the campaign.
It's a bold choice, but considering the campaign's inspiration, it makes a lot of sense. They've announced it's heavily rooted in the film Black Hawk Down, and they're aiming for a visual style that matches the films, like gritty realism. We're talking intense firefights, dust flying everywhere, a level of detail that'll make you feel like you're right there in the Somali desert.
Okay, pause, rewind. Did you just say Black Hawk Down? As in Ridley Scott's Black Hawk Down?
You caught that, did you? That's right.
Right.
Ridley Scott himself is involved in this project.
Wow.
And that brings a whole new layer of intrigue to this game.
This isn't just some quick cash in on a popular film license. This has the potential to be something truly special. Precisely. Because, let's be real, Black Hawk Down isn't your average popcorn flick. It's a raw, powerful, and frankly heartbreaking depiction of a real-world conflict with complex geopolitical ramifications.
Suddenly, this feels way bigger than just another shooter. We're talking about a game that could potentially offer a visceral, interactive history lesson alongside all the action. I'm not gonna lie, I'm getting chills just thinking about it.
As well you should. Because it's not just about the action, it's about the context, the weight of history that this game is drawing from. It's a brave move, and one that could pay off big time if they handle it right.
Okay, so we've got a free-to-play Delta Force on practically every screen imaginable with a campaign that has direct ties to Black Hawk Down. This isn't just a reboot, this is a full-on resurrection. Now let's get into the specifics. We know about the Black Hawk Down campaign, but what about the multiplayer? That's gonna be a huge part of this revival.
Oh, absolutely. They're not skipping on the multiplayer front either. In fact, they've announced 2 main modes that are going to be at the core of the experience.
Hit me with it. What kind of mayhem are we talking about here?
First up, you've got Havoc Warfare. And from the sounds of it, this is their answer to the ever-popular battle royale genre.
Okay.
Think massive maps, hundreds of players duking it out, and that frantic scramble for resources and survival.
Classic battle royale chaos, but with that Delta Force flavor. Love it. All right, what's next? What's the other big mode they've got cooking?
Get ready for this. It's called Hazard Operations, and it's described as their take on an extraction mode.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, based on what we've gleaned from the early intel, Hazard Operations sounds seriously intense.
Intense in a good way, I hope? Fill me in. What exactly is an extraction mode in the world of Delta Force? I'm picturing high-stakes tactical gameplay, maybe a helicopter escape or two.
You're on the right track.
Mhm.
Extraction modes are all about completing objectives under extreme pressure, and then, you guessed it, extracting from the hot zone. It's classic Delta Force DNA with a modern twist.
Speaking of modern twists, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Microtransactions. It's a free-to-play game, so they gotta make money somehow, right?
A valid concern in this day and age. But here's the good news. From what we've seen, they're sticking to purely cosmetic microtransactions.
So no pay-to-win shenanigans.
None whatsoever. They've been very clear about that. You can deck out your character in all sorts of cool gear, customize your weapons to your heart's content, but none of it will give you a competitive edge.
Music to my ears. It's a relief to hear that they're prioritizing skill over spending in this new iteration of Delta Force.
It's a smart move on their part. They're acknowledging the free-to-play model, enticing a wider audience, but also reassuring players that victory is earned through strategy, teamwork, and good old-fashioned shooting skills, not by flashing your credit card.
Okay, so we've covered the basics. Free-to-play, multi-platform, a Black Hawk Down campaign, and a multiplayer suite that sounds like a blast. But now I'm curious, what's the catch? There's gotta be a catch, right?
That, my friend, is the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Let's unpack this whole too good to be true situation after a quick break. All right, so we were just discussing the possibility of a catch with this Delta Force revival. I mean, it's free to play, it's going multi-platform, there's a Black Hawk Down campaign. It almost seems too ambitious, you know?
Well, ambition can be a double-edged sword, can't it? On the one hand, you've got the potential for something truly groundbreaking. On the other hand, there's always the risk of overreaching and falling short.
Exactly. So where does this Delta Force revival fall on that spectrum?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And honestly, it's too early to say for sure. We'll have to wait and see how it all plays out in reality.
Okay, fair enough. But let's speculate a little. What do you think are some of the biggest hurdles they're going to have to overcome to make this revival a success?
I think one of the biggest challenges is going to be capturing the essence of the original Delta Force while still appealing to a modern audience.
It's a delicate balancing act, for sure. Because let's be real, a lot has changed in the gaming world since the original Delta Force came out. What worked back then might not necessarily fly with today's gamers.
Precisely. The original Delta Force was a pioneer in large-scale multiplayer realistic settings and a focus on tactical gameplay. But back then, the technology was more limited, graphics were simpler, gameplay mechanics were less refined.
Right, and gamers' expectations have evolved. We're used to a certain level of polish and sophistication in our games now, especially in the shooter genre.
Absolutely. So the developers are going to have to find a way to retain the core elements that made Delta Force special, the large-scale battles, the focus on teamwork and strategy, while also modernizing the experience to meet the demands of today's players.
Speaking of modernizing the experience, let's talk about the free-to-play model for a minute. That's a whole different beast than what they were dealing with back in the day.
It certainly is, and it comes with its own set of challenges. For one thing, they're going to need to make sure the game is balanced and fair for all players, regardless of how much money they spend.
That's always the concern with free-to-play, right? You don't want to create a pay-to-win scenario where players who shell out cash have an unfair advantage over those who don't.
Exactly. And that's something that they've been very vocal about addressing. They've repeatedly stated that microtransactions will be purely cosmetic and won't impact gameplay.
Which is reassuring, but the proof is in the pudding, as they say.
True enough. But even beyond the issue of balance, there's the matter of monetization. They need to make sure they can actually generate revenue from the game without alienating players.
It's a fine line to walk. You want to give players options for customization and personalization, but you don't want to bombard them with constant offers and make it feel like a cash grab.
Right. It's all about finding that sweet spot.
Okay, so we've got the challenge of appealing to both old and new players, the challenge of the free-to-play model. Anything else we should add to the list?
I think it's also worth mentioning the competition. The gaming landscape is much more crowded now than it was when Delta Force was in its prime.
Oh, for sure. The shooter genre is absolutely jam-packed with big-budget titles. They're going to be facing some stiff competition right out of the gate.
And many of those competitors are already well established, with dedicated player bases and years of content under their belts. Delta Force is going to have to work hard to stand out from the crowd and carve out its own niche in the market.
They need to give players a reason to choose Delta Force over the countless other shooters out there.
Precisely.
So what's the verdict then? Do you think they can pull it off? Can Delta Force reclaim its throne in this brave new world of gaming?
Honestly, I think it's too close to call right now. There are a lot of factors at play, and it'll depend on how well they execute their vision. But I'll say this, I admire their ambition.
Me too. It's exciting to see a franchise like Delta Force, with its legacy and its history, taking such a bold step forward.
It's a gamble, for sure, but sometimes the biggest risks yield the biggest rewards.
Well said. And speaking of risks and rewards, let's dive a little deeper into that Black Hawk Down campaign. That's one of the most intriguing and potentially controversial aspects of this whole revival. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, so we're back, and we're diving headfirst into what might be the most fascinating and potentially sensitive part of this whole Delta Force revival. The Black Hawk Down campaign. I mean, it's one thing to have a generic military shooter, but to base a game around a real-life conflict, one with such a complex and, let's be honest, controversial history,
Right.
That's a whole other ballgame.
Yeah, you're not wrong to raise that point. It's a bold move, there's no doubt about that, and it's one that comes with a lot of responsibility.
Exactly. Because it's not just about entertainment anymore, right? You're dealing with real events, real people, and a conflict that continues to have repercussions to this day. Absolutely, and I think that's what makes this so intriguing. The developers aren't shying away from that responsibility. In fact, it seems like they're leaning into it. From the interviews and articles we've seen, they're approaching this with a level of sensitivity and respect that you don't always see in video games, especially in the action genre.
Okay, I'm really curious to hear more about this. How exactly are they planning to handle such a delicate subject matter? What specific steps are they taking to ensure that the Black Hawk Down campaign is both engaging and respectful?
Well, for one thing, they've brought in experts on the conflict. Historians, journalists, even people who were there on the ground in Mogadishu to consult on the game's development.
Wow, they're really going the extra mile to get this right.
They are. And it's not just about getting the facts straight. It's about understanding the nuances of the conflict, the different perspectives involved, and the human cost of war.
It sounds like they're trying to create an experience that's both entertaining and thought-provoking, something that will give players a glimpse into the realities of that conflict, without glorifying violence or simplifying the issues.
Exactly, and that's a tightrope walk, no doubt, but it's one that, if done well, could have a profound impact on players.
I'm imagining players finishing that campaign not just with a sense of accomplishment, but also with a deeper understanding of the events of Black Hawk Down and their historical context.
That's the ideal scenario, isn't it? To use the medium of video games to tell a story that matters, to educate as well as entertain.
It's a tall order, but I have to say I'm cautiously optimistic. Based on everything we've discussed, it seems like the developers are acutely aware of the responsibility they've taken on with this Black Hawk Down campaign.
They are, and they're not shying away from the tough questions. In fact, they're encouraging players to ask those questions, to engage the material on a deeper level.
And that's what makes this Delta Force revival so fascinating. It's not just a game, it's a conversation starter. It's a chance for players to step into a moment in history, to experience the chaos and complexity firsthand, and to come away with a new perspective on the world.
It's a bold experiment, there's no doubt about that.
And only time will tell if they can pull it off.
Yay.
But hey, even if it sparks a conversation, even if it gets people thinking about these issues in a new light, I'd say that's a victory in itself.
I completely agree. It's a testament to the power of video games that we can even have this conversation. That a medium often associated with escapism and entertainment can also be a tool for education, empathy, and understanding.
Well said. So there you have it, folks. The return of Delta Force. A bold gamble, a fascinating experiment, and a potential turning point for military shooters. Will it succeed in recapturing the glory of the original while navigating the complexities of a free-to-play model and a sensitive historical campaign? Only time will tell. But one thing's for sure, this is a story we'll be watching closely, and who knows, maybe this is just the beginning of a whole new era for Delta Force, an era where history and entertainment collide in ways we never thought possible. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Let us know your thoughts on this bold revival, and until next time, keep gaming, keep questioning, and keep exploring the ever-evolving world of interactive entertainment.